The studio lights blazed down on the stage, the kind that made even seasoned politicians sweat under their collars. The cameras were already rolling, broadcasting live across every major network in America. Millions of eyes were fixed on the debate, waiting to see whether Donald Trump could defend his record, or if Denzel Washington, who had shocked the nation by stepping into the political arena, would dismantle him in real time. Denzel leaned forward, his voice calm yet cutting through the silence like a blade. "Mr. Trump," he began, "the chaos we're living through today, the shutdowns, the division, the anger on every street corner, didn't appear from nowhere. You lit the match. You fanned the flames. You made this country weaker when you promised to make it strong." The crowd erupted, some cheering, some booing, as Trump's jaw tightened. Denzel didn't flinch, his eyes locked on Trump's, daring him to deny it. For years, Trump had faced tough questions, but never like this, not from Hollywood's most respected voice, a man known for integrity rather than politics. The atmosphere was electric, the kind that made history. America wasn't watching a debate anymore. They were watching a showdown. And no one knew who would walk away standing taller. Trump leaned into the microphone, his lips curling into the familiar smirk that his supporters adored and his critics despised. "Chaos," he shot back, his voice booming across the stage. "Denzel, let me remind you, you're an actor, not a policymaker. You've spent decades reading scripts written for you. I've spent decades creating jobs, building towers, and yes, leading this nation. The real chaos started when the elites, the media, and the so-called experts tried to stop me from draining the swamp. And guess what? They failed." The crowd split down the middle, half applauding, half jeering. Trump raised his hand, silencing them for a moment. "You blame me for division? Look in the mirror. Hollywood, the same industry you represent, has poisoned America with lies, with propaganda, with hatred for people like me. You stand here pretending to be the voice of truth, but in reality, you're just another puppet for the same establishment that tried to destroy me." Denzel's jaw tightened, but his eyes never wavered. He had expected Trump's counterattack, but hearing the words "live," in front of millions, gave them a sting. The audience leaned forward, captivated. This wasn't just politics anymore, it was raw, unfiltered combat, with reputations and legacies on the line. Every word spoken would echo across America long after the lights went dark. Denzel adjusted his tie and leaned forward, his voice calm yet cutting like a razor. "Mr. Trump, I may be an actor, but at least I know the difference between a role and reality. You've been playing a role your entire life, pretending to be a savior of the people while feeding your own ego. You talk about draining the swamp, but you invited the swamp into your inner circle. Billionaires, lobbyists, men with dirty hands, you gave them a seat at the table while ordinary Americans begged for crumbs." His tone rose, electrifying the room. "Don't twist this into Hollywood versus Washington. This isn't about the movies I've made or the awards I've won. This is about families losing their homes, children growing up hungry, and a nation tearing itself apart while you were busy bragging about crowd sizes." Gasps rippled through the audience, cameras zooming in to catch Trump's reaction. "You say chaos started with the elites? No, Donald. The chaos started when you convinced half of America to see their neighbors as enemies. When you turned every press conference into a battlefield. When you made truth negotiable." The studio was silent for a heartbeat, every viewer glued to their screens. Denzel wasn't just challenging Trump, he was dismantling the myth Trump had built around himself. And in that silence, America held its breath, waiting for the next explosion. Trump finally leaned forward, his face flushed, his hand chopping the air as if to slice through Denzel's words. "You think you're some kind of hero, Denzel? A Hollywood actor lecturing me about America?" he barked, his voice booming in the studio and echoing through millions of living rooms across the nation. "You sit in your fancy mansions, reading scripts, pretending to be tough on screen. But I actually lived it. I fought for this country, I built jobs, I stood up against China, against NATO freeloaders, against the media that lies every single day. He jabbed a finger toward Denzel, his posture sharp, almost trembling with fury. Chaos? You dare talk about chaos? You should thank me for protecting your precious freedoms. Without me, you wouldn't even have a stage to complain from. Hollywood is dying, the economy was roaring under me until the pandemic hit, and let's not forget, I rebuilt the military you and your liberal friends ignored for decades. The crowd erupted into mixed reactions, cheers, boos, claps, and jeers colliding in a storm of noise. Trump seized on the energy, raising his voice louder, his cadence quicker. You don't know the people, Denzel. You know scripts, red carpets, and fake applause. I stood in the rain with coal miners, I shook hands with farmers, I hugged police officers after riots burned their cities. And you, he paused, his glare locking on Denzel like a spotlight, you call me the cause of division? No. Division existed long before me. I just had the guts to say it out loud. Maybe you don't like that, but America does. The room buzzed with tension as Trump slammed his palm on the desk, daring Denzel to fire back. Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned forward with that calm yet razor-sharp composure that had defined his screen presence for decades, but this time it wasn't acting, it was raw conviction. Donald, he said slowly, his voice steady but slicing through the tension like a blade, you can list your rallies, your slogans, your coal miners and farmers. But leadership isn't about photo ops, it's about responsibility. And every time you had the chance to unite this country, you chose to divide it instead. Every crisis became an opportunity for you to turn neighbor against neighbor, race against race, city against rural. That isn't strength, that's manipulation. The studio audience hushed, leaning in as Denzel's words carried more weight than the applause or boos. His eyes locked on Trump, unwavering. You talk about hugging police officers after riots. But what about hugging the families who cried because of those same riots? What about the mothers who buried their sons because the fire you fanned spread beyond control? What about the Americans who died from COVID while you called it a hoax on live TV? You say you gave people jobs, yet you stripped away trust. You gave speeches, yet you poisoned dialogue. You didn't protect democracy, you tested how far you could bend it before it broke. Denzel paused, his hand tapping the desk softly, like a gavel signaling judgment. The chaos we're talking about? It wasn't just in the streets. It was in people's hearts, in their homes, in their faith in institutions. That's what you shattered. And you can't blame the media, the pandemic, or the so-called elites forever. At some point, a leader takes accountability, or he admits he was never a leader to begin with. The silence that followed was suffocating, until a single clap broke out, quickly joined by others, the tension spiraling toward eruption. Trump smirked, raising his hand to silence the applause that had broken out. His voice sharpened, dripping with defiance. Denzel, you're a great actor, I'll give you that. But this isn't Hollywood. This is real life. And in real life, presidents make tough calls, presidents fight for survival. You say I divided the country? Wrong. I gave millions a voice when they were ignored by the same elites who now cheer you on. Those forgotten men and women, they weren't just background characters in your Hollywood scripts. They were the backbone of this nation, and I put them back in the spotlight where they belong. He jabbed a finger toward the audience, his tone rising. You talk about chaos in the streets, but that chaos was fueled by weak mayors, failed governors, and corrupt Democrats who let lawlessness run wild just to blame me. You think I wanted riots? No. But I wasn't going to let anarchists burn this country to the ground without a fight. That's why people called me strong, because I stood up when others hid. Trump leaned back, but his eyes gleamed with fire. And as for COVID, don't rewrite history. I closed borders when everyone called it xenophobic. I fast-tracked vaccines when experts doubted it could be done. Lives were saved because I acted, not because Hollywood lectured. So spare me your moral speeches, Denzel. You're an actor playing hero roles, while I lived one in the Oval Office. The crowd erupted, half in cheers, half in jeers, the studio on the verge of losing control. Denzel tightened his jaw, refusing to let Trump's counterstrike shake him. The debate was no longer politics, it was personal, raw, and explosive, with the audience caught between thunder and lightning. Denzel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as if he were staring straight through Trump. The room hushed, sensing that something heavy was about to drop. His voice was measured at first, calm but sharp as a blade. You keep talking about strength, Donald. You keep painting yourself as the hero who fought for the forgotten man. But let me tell you something, true strength is not crushing the weak. True strength is not pointing fingers while people die. True strength is standing up for justice, even when it costs you everything. And you? You folded when the moment demanded courage. You exploited pain. You turned division into currency. And then you sold it back to America like it was salvation. The crowd murmured, some gasping at the brutal phrasing. Denzel didn't pause. His tone rose, now thunderous, his words hitting like a gavel. You said you gave people a voice? No, you gave them a megaphone for their anger, while you muted compassion. You claim you stopped chaos? No, you lit the match, watched the fire, then called yourself the firefighter. And COVID? Let's not twist facts. You gambled with lives, downplayed a plague, bragged about miracles while thousands of families buried loved ones. Denzel's voice shook not with fear, but with righteous fury. You want to talk about heroes? A hero doesn't abandon truth. A hero doesn't hide behind lies. A hero doesn't love power more than people. And right now, Donald, everything about you screams cowardice disguised as strength. The crowd erupted, half cheering, half booing, while Trump's jaw tightened, his knuckles widening as he gripped the podium. The stage felt less like a debate hall and more like a battlefield where every word was a weapon. Trump snapped back, voice rising like a siren. Cowardice? I faced the media, the deep state, the smug elites, every single day. You faced cameras with cue cards. He pounded the desk and turned to the audience. This man wants to shame you for loving your country. He wants you to believe your pride is hatred, your faith is bigotry, your questions are crimes. They want obedience. I demand accountability. The room fractured, cheers like thunder, boos like hail. Trump pressed harder. When cities burned, I offered help, Democrat mayors refused. When the border collapsed, I acted, they sued. When schools stayed closed, I fought to open them, they mocked. Who chose chaos? He pivoted back to Denzel, eyes blazing. You preach unity, but your unity means surrender. You call my supporters extremists because they won't bow. Guess what? Neither will I. The moderator's cue light flashed uselessly, control was gone. Denzel didn't blink. He let the volume settle, then spoke like a judge reading a verdict. Strength without truth is theater. Patriotism without empathy is branding. And power without restraint? That's how democracies fracture. Trump started to interject, Denzel overrode him, still calm. You didn't just polarize, you monetized division. You turned grievance into a business model, and America paid the bill in trust, in lives, in hope. A hush fell. Even the cameras felt closer. Real leaders don't need villains, Denzel finished. They build neighbors. The line landed like a hammer on marble, clean, final, impossible to ignore. The producer cut to a split screen, Denzel steady, Trump simmering, a nation suspended between flame and water. The moderator finally found a lane. Last question. If given one unfilibustered minute to speak directly to the American people, what would you say? Trump leapt first, seizing the oxygen. America, I fought for you. I fought your battles when no one else would, the forgotten worker, the overtaxed family, the soldier no one visited. They mocked me for it. They called you names for it. But I never quit on you, and I never will. Applause roared from one half of the room, the other sat still as stone. Denzel waited for the echo to die. Then, with a single breath, he began. America, I'm not here to humiliate a man. I'm here to honor the truth you deserve. We are sick of leaders who cash in on our fears and call it courage. We are done confusing volume with vision. We are done electing arsonists to run the firehouse. He leaned in, voice lower, heavier. You want law and order? Start with truth and dignity. You want borders? Start with humanity. You want strength? Start with a leader who can lose an argument without declaring war on his neighbors. The audience murmured, some stood. Denzel didn't look away from the lens. We don't need a savior, he said. We need adults. Trump barked a laugh, tried to cut in, his mic went red. For the first time all night, the studio obeyed the silence. And in that silence, millions at home felt something they hadn't in years, the outline of a different future. The cue for closing statements lit green, but no one moved. Trump's jaw clenched, he leaned toward Denzel, voice low enough that the boom mics barely caught it. You'll never understand power. Power is taking the punch and still owning the room. Denzel answered without turning. Power is telling the truth when the room is for sale. The moderator inhaled, reclaiming the stage. Gentlemen, final line. Trump squared his shoulders, summoning the rally cadence that built his brand. They want you scared. I want you strong. Choose strength. His supporters erupted, flags waved on screens across the country. Then Denzel rose, not theatrically, but as if standing were part of the sentence. He placed both hands on the desk. Choose strong if you must, he said, voice quiet enough that America leaned closer, but choose the kind that doesn't crush the weak. A beat. Because if your strength needs enemies to survive, it isn't strength. It's fear in costume. The timer flashed 0, the theme music swelled, the credits crept. But the moment refused to end. Clips flooded the internet, Trump's clenched fist, Denzel's unblinking stare, the line about arsonists and firehouses, the last quiet strike about fear in costume. Pundits rushed to declare winners. Pollsters spun dials. But outside the graphs and spin rooms, something simpler happened. In diners and carpools, on late shifts and quiet porches, people repeated two questions Denzel had left hanging in the air like a verdict: who profits when we hate each other? And who are we when we stop? The broadcast ended. The argument didn't. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you witnessed more than just an exchange of words, you witnessed a battle for the very soul of this nation. Two powerful voices sat across from each other, and every sentence carried the weight of truth, betrayal, and accountability. Denzel did not come here to play politics, he came here to demand honesty, justice, and a higher standard for the country we all call home. Trump, on the other hand, fired back with his trademark defiance, refusing to bend under pressure. What happened here tonight was raw, unscripted, and unforgettable. It was not a performance, it was a confrontation that shook the room, a moment that millions will replay, analyze, and argue about for years to come. And whether you agree with Denzel, or whether you stand firmly with Trump, one thing is undeniable: America deserves better than lies, cover-ups, and excuses. History will remember this night as a turning point, not just in politics, but in culture, where art and power collided on live television, forcing us to look in the mirror and ask, what kind of nation do we want to be? The cameras may turn off, but the questions raised here tonight will echo long after the lights go dark. America's story is still being written, and tonight, another chapter has been carved into its pages. Stay alert, stay awake, and above all, never stop demanding the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you witnessed more than just an exchange of words, you witnessed a battle for the very soul of this nation. Two powerful voices sat across from each other, and every sentence carried the weight of truth, betrayal, and accountability. Denzel did not come here to play politics, he came here to demand honesty, justice, and a higher standard for the country we all call home. Trump, on the other hand, fired back with his trademark defiance, refusing to bend under pressure. What happened here tonight was raw, unscripted, and unforgettable. It was not a performance, it was a confrontation that shook the room, a moment that millions will replay, analyze, and argue about for years to come. And whether you agree with Denzel, or whether you stand firmly with Trump, one thing is undeniable: America deserves better than lies, cover-ups, and excuses. History will remember this night as a turning point, not just in politics, but in culture, where art and power collided on live television, forcing us to look in the mirror and ask, what kind of nation do we want to be? The cameras may turn off, but the questions raised here tonight will echo long after the lights go dark. America's story is still being written, and tonight, another chapter has been carved into its pages. Stay alert, stay awake, and above all, never stop demanding the truth.